Hey everyone, Spicy Toast Gaming here. I hope you're having a great start to your week, and I hope this video can make it a little bit better. With the start of the week, we have a new round of weekly adventures. So we have a 1.5, a 2, and a 4-star adventure. So pretty high level week compared to most weeks. For the 1.5, we have combat awareness, all units have scout, and also note the boss is Azir. So even though this is 1.5, the enemy will probably be able to end games pretty quickly, so you probably want to actually play a aggressive deck yourself, and that's going to be great for the combat awareness. Now, this is the best with all of the old Gale Force champs, so if you want to have fun playing and pretend that you had the old overpowered Gale Force, this is now your chance. So Jax, Diana, and Teemo will all be great here, as well as just some normal aggressive champions such as Nidalee will all be wonderful for this adventure. Alright, next up then, the 2-star, this one, Narwhal Blessing. Game start, all players, so you and the enemy, summon 3 golden narwhals. Now these are elusive, but they have vulnerable, so the enemy will be able to challenge them, essentially forcing them to block. We also have Blind Rage, the player's units with 4 or more power can't block. Now this is one you can deal with on anyone. It's just something you have to be aware of, and as long as you don't get surprised by it and you plan ahead, it will really be fine. Now for Narwhal Blessing, and especially anytime there's a sort of mirror matchup, it's really good to be on one of the scaling decks. So essentially Tahm Kench or Garen will be wonderful here, because both you and the enemy will have these 3 golden narwhals, but yours will be able to scale a lot higher than the enemy's will. So that's a great way to turn this to your advantage. Also, being someone like Kai'Sa, where you want to have a lot of keywords, this is great having that elusive. But there's also other decks that also want to stack keywords, such as Poro King. This will get you one step closer to activating your star power and buffing up your whole board. So Poro King would also be decent here. But you could also go for any champion that has Corrupted Star Fragment on it, so that you can consume those narwhals and get that elusive on your own unit. So a lot of different ways you can play this one. Just remember about the Blind Rage and don't get surprised by it, and you should be alright. Last up then, the 4-star up against Zed, so this one will be pretty tough. We have Death is Like the Wind, so when the player plays their first unit each round, stun it. Now this will be pretty annoying, especially for some of those slower decks that might only play one unit around. A lot of ways we can deal with this, but first, Noxian Might rank 2. This is essentially Darius' star power. So each round, the first time the foe summons a unit, granted 4 power and overwhelm. That is actually a pretty big deal. It's going to be a lot of damage the enemy's going to throw towards your Nexus. Then we have the Vicious Enemy, just making everything a little bit harder. Now, Death is Like the Wind. You can try to go wide with your board, so you're having a lot of different units you can summon each round. That can be a decent way to get around Death is Like the Wind. The one issue is the Noxian Might. The enemy's going to have these big units that you don't want to have small blockers for. Now you could go someone like Poro King, where you're playing a lot of units and then scaling them up quite heavily, but I think it'd probably be best to go with some of those decks where you're not playing that many units, but your units are just staying on the board and never leaving the board. That way you don't have to deal with Death is Like the Wind. So you could go a more champion-focused direction, such as like Jax or Diana, where your champion is your main powerhouse, they're on the board early, and they're going to be working to end you the game very quickly. Or you could even go someone like Annie, where you're mostly using spells and skills, so even if one of your units gets stunned, that's not that big of a deal. Morgana would actually be really good here because most of your units, it doesn't really matter if they get stunned when you play them. Some of them have a strong play effect and that's why you're playing them, and that will still go off. Also, it doesn't matter if the enemy is having these big, strong units, because if they're immobile and chained up, they can't do anything. Really, any CC deck here would actually be pretty good. Even if you're getting CC'd a little bit each round, you can just stun or frostbite the enemy's units to make sure they can't get these attacks off. So there are many different ways you can try to play this one. You just really need to be aware of Death is Like the Wind and make sure that the first unit you play each round is one you're okay with it getting stunned. Now this is going to hard counter decks like Daybreak, where the first unit you play every round is pretty important, but other than Daybreak, there's a lot of different ways to play around this. And then Noxian Might, again, just one you need to be very aware of and don't get surprised by the enemy dropping these big units that are going to be hitting your Nexus. I think probably going for a CC or control deck would probably be the best here. So I know most people are probably just going to break out their most overpowered champions, but if you're struggling, I think going for a CC deck such as Morgana, Yasuo, or Annie would actually work out really well here. So if you're struggling, try one of them out, and I think they should be a good counter to the enemy's powers. Alright, that's it for this set of weeklies. If you have any special tips or tricks or champions you want to shout out that you think did really well, or if there's any pitfalls that these adventures have you might fall into, definitely leave that down below for your fellow players. Help each other out, and I hope we all have a great week together.